Good morning, everyone. How is everyone today? Thank you. Well, today I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story I learned when I was quite young, and I hope you enjoy it. There was a little girl who grew up in a magical tiny city by a river that wiggled and waggled like a serpent that was lost and looking for its mother. Well, her father just loved this city because he came from a south place where people had to walk with their heads facing down most of the time. And he taught his little girl to keep her head facing up and even tilt it up a little so that she could look into everyone's eyes. And her mother entertained her little daughter with wonderful stories from all the books she had read. And it fascinated the little girl so much that in time she started making up her own stories, especially spooky stories, so she could tell them to the neighborhood kids. And they would get so frightened that they would run away and come back for more. Well, this little girl was too young yet to formulate into words what she felt, this gratitude that was growing within her for her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Broadshoulders. In time, she went to class and started learning about the history of the area, about the Haudenosaunee Native Americans who lived all around the area, and about the transplanted Africans, the Yoruba, who came through and left traditions passed on generation to generation about the love of freedom and independence. And she learned about the people that were influenced by these traditions. People like Fannie Lou Hamer and Sojourner Truth and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Joyce. I forgot her last name. Well, now that she was older, she could put it into words. She realized that she was riding on the shoulders of her parents and of the leaders who were not afraid to speak out and write words about freedom and independence. From that point on, she decided she was going to look for more shoulders to ride on. Well, Mama and Papa Broadshoulders worked very hard and very honestly and earned the respect of many friends in that tiny city by the Wiggly and Waggly River. In time, they were able to establish a very important place, and it was on a special hill on the main street of the tiny city by the river. They called it a hotel. That hotel allowed people of a darker skin color to come and feel welcome and never be turned away. In that hotel, they established a kitchen, which eventually became a restaurant. And the food was so special because they used recipes from the South Place. And people of all colors came around and declared that food to be especially lip-smacking, finger-licking good. Well, they were so successful that soon they had to call up more family and friends to help with another establishment. But this time it was a little further north, in a village by a big and beautiful lake. There they had a white Victorian house with tiny little cottages attached to it. And Mama and Papa Broadshoulders also established a kitchen there with food that, you know, had finger-licking good food. But this time, there were artists that came. And there were workers that worked in all of the establishments all around the big and beautiful lake. And for the first time, the young girl heard music that she fell in love with. Music of Cab Calloway, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Sammy Davis Jr. They all stayed there. And she heard the songs of Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday. And she just loved the way that music could make you feel so happy that you had to dance, or so sad that you felt the depths of despair and you had to sing. Well, she decided that she would look for more artists' shoulders to ride on. And she found the shoulders of a woman named it's not Carrot Top, it's Brick Top. Brick Top. She was famous as a performer. She was so famous, and she was such a good performer in every which way, that she had friends in every level of society. And she wound up owning 3 nightclubs in 3 different countries. Oh, she was so impressed by Brick Top. Another artist that she so admired was Miss Ethel Waters. Initially a songstress and a performer, then she became a stage and screen actress. Oh, how she loved her. She loved her so much that she borrowed one of her stage names, Sweet MaMa Stringbean, whenever she started telling stories professionally. Well, people knew about these 2 establishments because they were listed in a very special directory. This directory was called the Negro Motorists Green Book. And it listed places where people of a darker skin color could go without fear of being turned away. So their businesses prospered. Soon it came time for the young lady to travel downriver to the capital place of study. Well, there she studied very deeply and read voraciously. Quite by accident, she found out that there had been a very big march in the very large city by the sea. That march was a protest march. In fact, it was called the Silent Protest Parade. 10,000 people marched on the 5th Avenue of that very big city by the sea. And they were protesting atrocities that had happened in East St. Louis and that had been happening for decades in the South Place. They marched silently, expressing their horror. And it was the first time in this country that a congregation so large gathered for that purpose. Another thing that she discovered was that, my goodness, there were men and women of every shade of skin, of every class, of every land on this beautiful round earth that weren't afraid to stand up, speak out, and even sacrifice their lives in order for people to be free and independent and cooperative. Well, she was so inspired spiritually by all of the shoulders that she could choose to ride on. In time, she graduated and decided that she would become a professional librarian. and she took herself further down the river to the very big city by the sea, and she worked in the libraries there, and she was so happy. She was honing her skills as a teacher of loving books, as a teacher of writing your heart and your mind, as a teacher who could tell stories and fascinate the minds of all of her listeners, old and young, and as a teacher of everyone else, giving and telling their own stories. She loved being there because she was very close to the artists that she admired. She was very close to the amount of books that she loved to read. After 20 years, she returned home to the North Country. This time, she divided her time between the tiny little city and the village by the big and beautiful lake. Here, she continued her skills and enjoyed the participation of all the villagers. She also joined many community organizations and gave of her time and her efforts. Sometimes, at night, she would join musical reviews. And she had the ability to transform herself into the most magnificent birds. Oh my goodness, sometimes she would become a flaming flamingo, and she would strut across the stage, back and forth, and dance, and sing, and sway to the music that she loved. And sometimes she would become an elegant egret. Oh, keeping out of mischief now. Really, I'm in love and oh, she had a blast. Well, she not only loved being on stage, she loved everything about the theater. So she learned how to work the lights the old-fashioned way. You had to use your feet and your hands. And then she learned the new console, pressing the buttons, shining the light on others who wanted to be on stage. She was a consummate performer. Well, since this isn't a fairy tale, life has its ups and downs, and sickness did visit her, and it shortened her time to be able to tell her stories and to get stories from the people that she loved. But it isn't everyone. Of all the friends and all the acquaintances that she met, that could make people smile when her name is mentioned. I have it on good authority that she enjoyed indulging in a particular brew. This brew is very potent. In fact, it must have had 2 names in its country of origin. Because in English, it is called a double white Russian. Well, there are 2 things that the shoulder rider wished everybody could have the pleasure of doing. And that is digging deep into their consciousness and acknowledging all the shoulders they have ridden on all of these years. And the other is that they have the blessing of finding more shoulders to ride on till the ends of their days. Thank you for listening to my story. Oh yes, I am the ghost spirit of Shirley McFerson, the shoulder rider.